So today we'll be talking about interaction design. And interaction design is a process to get you from your concept that you've created for your system all the way through to thinking about it systematically, creating flows of how people would complete certain tasks in the interface, and then getting down to the individual screen design. And interaction design is a discipline that brings together multiple areas of knowledge, from traditional design to usability, to human-computer interaction, to scenario design, service design. All of these different aspects fit in to create the interaction. And interaction design is a holistic way to think about how someone will engage with your service. What are all of the touch points that they'll be interacting with your system? How do you contact them? How do they contact you? What are the specific screens that they'll see in completing a certain task and interacting with your system? So we'll take you today through 3 different topics. We'll start with modeling and ways to think about your concept of your system and really what is the main objective? What is it really trying to do for your users in their daily lives? We'll go from the modeling to thinking more about the structure of your application. What are the use cases? What tasks will people need to perform in your system? And how do you structure those? What are the different flows that users need to go through? What sequence of screens do they need to go through in order to complete a certain task? And then finally, we'll get down to the design of the individual screens themselves and talking about designing those screens for various platforms and taking into account the unique interaction styles of devices on iOS or on Android or Windows Phone or other mobile operating systems that are out there today. So we'll start by diving into modeling. Modeling is certainly the most abstract part of what we'll talk about today, but hopefully I can give enough concrete examples and a bunch of different styles of modeling that you can use to create a model for your own system. So modeling is really kind of a visual abstraction, a way to think about what your system is trying to do, how it will change people's lives, how people interact with it, how the different components of it fit together. And it really helps to frame your solution, especially if you're working with multiple stakeholders on a project. It really helps to show this is what we're talking about, this is not what we're talking about, so people understand the scope of what you're about to engage on. And it can really help you frame the service to think about what's the user trying to accomplish when they come to your system, or what is the system trying to accomplish when someone comes to the system, and how does all of that interplay. So it's really important to do this to define the scope of your system, to build consensus among team members, and really just conceptualize in your mind what's unique about what you'll be creating. And that will help everything else in the design process, from coming up with the flow and the tasks and then to the screens. So one way to think about this is in concept models. And you can think about a concept model as how do users think about your system? What activities are they there to perform? Are there different types of users that engage with your system? Are there kind of moderators or content contributors or people viewing content? Are there different modes that people will interact with your system? Do they have a more passive viewing mode and a more active creating mode? Thinking of those different models when you're creating your concept is quite important. Think about the different phases that your system might address, or the different places where people might use your system. Other models might think about how your system changes the landscape from what was there before to what will happen afterwards. So how do people do a certain task today? And then how would they do it differently when using your system? And you might want to think if there's a familiar metaphor that will help people understand your system or will help you conceptualize your system. Here's an example that was from a project that we did at Motorola that led to the MotoBlur service that we launched about 5 years ago now. And so what we were thinking about is a way to get social contact information and social updates aggregated in the phone book of your mobile phone. So if I went to a particular contact in my mobile phone, not only could I see their phone number and address, but I could see all their updates from Twitter and Facebook and Flickr. I could have conversations with them across any of those different tools. So if I cared about a person, I could just go to their entry in the phone book, and I wouldn't have to go launch 5 different apps to see what they were posting and navigating to them in each one of those apps to see what they had been posting later. The phone book really became this central repository of all the information about my friends. So here's a model that we created. And so we started by looking at what does the ecosystem of contacts and social updates look like today. And we thought the metaphor of Paris streets would be really informative. So in Paris, you have all of these squares and these circles where multiple roads come together. They're mostly disconnected. There are some streets that do help connect them. But if you think about Paris as a whole, you kind of have all of these distinct little squares. And so one of those squares could be the contact list on your mobile phone. One might be the media sharing sites like Flickr. One might be social networks like Facebook or Twitter. One might be the messaging that you do in a messaging app on the phone. But for the most part, in 2007, 2008, when we were conceptualizing this, those were all separate islands. Nothing was really bringing them all together. So we did this before and after model, where the before is each of these islands is a separate little island with minimal connections between them. And then we moved on to the after model, where we had these strong connections from everything back to the phone book. So the media would go to the phone book, the social updates would come to the phone book, the messaging would come to the phone book, aggregation would come to the phone book, and we would be this central island. We would be like the big square on Champs-Élysées by the Arc de Triomphe. We'd be where everything comes together into one place. And so that's the metaphor we created. We helped expand on that metaphor a little bit by saying what each spot would be, what the core values of our service would be. It would be a service to bring everything together, to be a destination to explore the rich content and context about your friends. So the phone book wasn't just going to be a place to launch a phone call or a text message. It would really become a destination that you would go to and browse. So that's one model we made. We made another before and after model that just looked at what kind of interaction do people have with their phone book. And we said that the phone book of 2006, 2007 was very much about management. It was about entering phone numbers. It was about updating phone numbers when people got a new phone. It was about adding people, removing people very manually. And most of the tasks that you performed in your phone book were of that variety. And then obviously you went in to make phone calls and to start conversations as well, which were these very lightweight interactions around people. But we said after, we wanted to turn that model on its head. We wanted to make it so you really never had to manage contact details about your friends and family in your phone book, but you'd go there to richly explore all of this content about them, to learn what they were up to, and to engage with them in richer and richer ways than just a phone call. This before and after model really helped us to conceptualize what we wanted to do with the system. And as we came up with the use cases and the screen designs and the flows, it helped us to always think about, let's minimize the setup and the interaction, and let's maximize exploring content and really learning about people, and that would be really important. Some other models that you can do, you can think about user mental models. We created this model on our system that looked at how people thought about their contacts, that they might have a close group of 4 to 6 people that they talk to almost every day, they keep in touch with, they share lots and lots of rich media with. And then they have various regular contacts and peripheral contacts, some of which come in groups. You might have the soccer team that comes together for a year and plays together and then disbands, right? You might have a particular group of people you're working with on a work assignment, and that group is there and then it disbands. So we had thought about these mental models of groups that come and go, as well as different degrees of closeness in your social relationships. Other models can be system diagrams, more technical diagrams that show how your system is architected. And this showed us that what we were really creating here was a service. that had multiple plugins to different external services. We could plug in RSS feeds, we could plug in services like Flickr or Facebook or Twitter, and then aggregate all that data and provide it not only to the phone book, but to dashboards about what's going on with your friends, to other applications on the phone, and really provide this service across all applications. And get rid of this idea you can see on the left, no more siloed applications. The idea was you shouldn't have to go in and out of 10 apps just to see what was going on with the people you care about. Other types of models look at different content types. So you can look at different types of content you could provide in your system, different types of users that interact with those different types of content, as shown here, right? There's things that you need to interact with right away on your phone. If you have an incoming phone call, that's a piece of content you need to interact with immediately because it will go away after just a few seconds. There's other types of content you could be more patient with, like weather updates or battery information. And then you can have other things that are more about exploring and checking things out, right? Music, search, recommendations, media from friends. It's a much different style of interaction to interact with that kind of content over, let me answer a phone call that's coming in right now. So then when you get to displaying all of these different types of information in an interface, you can really think about how does that need to be displayed? What needs to be interruptive? What needs to be more visual and exploratory based on the different types of content that you have? You can also create models of user types. You might have different styles of users that use your system. You might have people who are huge social network users. You might have people that are big media sharing users, but on platforms like Flickr instead of platforms like Facebook or Instagram. You might have people who are big communicators and are using the phone dialing features a lot. And you might have people who never even make a phone call, who communicate through purely digital means with all of their friends and family. So creating a model of your different user types might help you get some nuances into different types of users you need to support and different types of tasks you need to support when it comes time to designing your interface. Another model that I really like is called a service blueprint. And this was traditionally used in service industries for things like airlines and restaurants, and thinking about what are all the different touch points that entity has with the user. So if you think about booking a flight, you interact with the airline to research and look up prices and look up times of flights. You interact with the airline to book the flight. You interact with them again when you're going to check in for the flight. You interact with them again when you come to the airport and you get your boarding pass and you go through security. You interact with them when you're trying to find your gate, when you're trying to figure out when the flight is going to board. You're constantly interacting with them at various touch points. And you could think about a mobile application and service in a very similar way. You can think about when a user first signs up for the service. You can think about when the service might push them a notification or push them an email with aggregated content or to tell them about new features of the service. And you can think about for each of those interactions, what happens at the user, what information is shown to them, what actions do they have to take. You can think about what is happening behind the scenes to make those things happen. What needs to happen on the server, what needs to happen with their friends and family or moderators of forums so that certain things happen, so that certain notifications appear or certain content appears when the user requests it. So this is just a really helpful way to think about each of your touch points with the user, to see places where people might forget about your service, to think about opportunities where you can push something to them to keep them engaged and remind them that you're there and that your service is something that they might want to keep interacting with. So now I'd like you to think about your project, think about the concept that you have so far, and think about what models it might be helpful to create for that project and for that concept that you have. Usually it helps to sketch out a few different models. So think about maybe trying a before and after, or thinking about user mental models, or thinking about user types or content types or a service model. and just spend some time sketching out a few different models to explore your system in a little more detail, and to think about what is the core of your concept that really makes it different from what's come before, and how people would interact with that particular concept. And then in the next talk, we'll come back to getting to use cases and screens and flows and making this abstract a little more concrete.